Everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon. I'm your guy. You're my people. And let me tell you, I got a smooth, super smooth sister on the channel today. We at Strong Inspirations, where you know what we do. We give it to you straight, no chaser. We gonna she gonna intoxicate your mind. And I'm just gonna ask a few questions. She good. Man, let me tell you something. Check it out. Watch. This lady vetted me. She vetted me. She said, hey, I don't know nothing about no Strong Inspiration. Let me check you out. She watched the video and said, hey, I don't mind coming on because the intent is sincere. My intent is sincere to inspire you by letting the people do the talking, to educate you by letting the people do the talking, and finding people who have stories of all sorts. And this lady has one of those, many of those. She's good. And then my effort is to entertain you with light and intelligent, engaging conversation. Ooh, I'm using some words today, ain't everybody? I'm trying to keep up.
Love it. I love it. I love the energy.
I'm a better person now that I got the people who come on the channel because I know some stuff. And it's them who have helped me understand it. Now, as you all might know, there are a lot of videos that are on the channel. I'm probably doing 4 or 5 a week where I put them up. So I ask that you hit the subscribe button. It's free. Don't ask no information. Just subscribe to the channel. What it does is, and it's just between me and you, my viewers, it let me know you like me, because I like you already. You sitting there spending your precious time watching me. I'm so grateful. Hit the like button on the videos, and in particular, you're gonna like this one. Watch. She's good. She's gooder than good. And watch. So hit the like button on this video. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. You get notified that somehow. I got one lady, she sent me a message. She said, I got the notification bell, and all of a sudden I just hear your voice. And I'm excited because I know you are going to do some and tell and have some things said that I'm interested in. Boom. So hit the notification and tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Please, my friends, don't keep it to yourself. Just copy the link on a video and share it on your social media, and then put in there, everybody, you know, who are watching this, hit the subscribe button. Did you see the video I got with the guy who talks about healthy eating and what slaves ate and what people in Africa eat and stuff like that? And the one thing he said that was really kind of mind-blowing, he said he was over in Africa and they had went out and got this this goat, tied the legs up, the goat in the back of the car. He's screaming and hollering and stuff like that. They get him home, they chop off his neck, they drain the blood, and then the blood makes a soup that they eat. Ooh, I say that's got to be some healthy eating or something. I don't know. And then I told somebody this, and they knew the name of that soup. I said, whoa, that's deep. Watch the sister, she might know some of this stuff. Did you see the video I did with the guy? Check it out. He found out that his grandfather was in the KKK and participated in the Elaine massacre. He said, once I found this out, I never spoke to him again. And he wrote a book about it.
Wow.
Unbelievable. Watch that video. Did you see the video I did with the lady? She's a professor out of, I think, Georgetown. Yep, that's what it is. She's on the channel. I got heavyweights like this lady here. And she says that her great-grandfather was a part and participated in the Back to Africa movement. So he's in America. You know, slavery is ended. They say, you want to go back to Africa? He says, yeah, I'll go. And ended up in Liberia. There's a story behind the Liberia thing, and I want to get somebody on the channel to talk about that. He ended up in Liberia. And then he actually relocated to Sierra Leone. But she tells that story. Watch that video. Did you see the one I just put up with the guy out of Johannesburg, South Africa, who grew up in Nigeria? Oh my God. See,
Well,
I'm international with my situation.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it sounds like you've talked to many, many, many people about a rich array of topics.
Yep, I sure do, everybody. I do. And this is the plan, the game plan for you all, so you get it all. And so all those videos are on the channel, and then there's some more. Right quick, I got to tell you, if you don't know, I'm a filmmaker, everybody. This is where it all began, so to speak, for me in this Black History quest. It was when I did this documentary, and it's streaming on Amazon. It's called Business in the Black. And because I'm and always have been throughout my life, for the most part, a business owner, I focus on business owners and the history of Black business in America. And that's what my documentary does. And then that's also what my book does. Get you a copy. This book is selling good now. Yeah. Something is happening. People are buying my book, and I'm excited. I had one guy buy 10 copies. And just the other day, he said, I want to give them out. And don't wait till Christmas to do it either. Give it now. Share this knowledge now. It's over 200 facts. And it starts with how slaves got their freedom. Some of what we might not know a lot about is some sued for it and won. They called them freedom lawsuits. There was some of those going on. There was a bunch of escapes. There was a bunch of, situations where they might let you go. And we might not know a lot about this, but I cite this in the book. There were a number of instances where the brothers and sisters owned a business and used the profits to buy their freedom. So watch, read my book, everybody. It's very good. Now you hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word, and I'm gonna keep using it probably to the end of my day, so on and so forth. I just love it. And in my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that's the introduction to my guest today. She's a strong lady. Watch out, my friends. She gonna blow your mind. I know it. She gonna blow your mind. So stop what you're doing and focus in on her just a second. Come on, introduce yourself. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations.
Oh, absolutely. What an introduction. A lot to live up to right now. I'm absolutely strong. Yeah. I'm gonna try to come in with this energy for all of your fantastic viewers. Yeah, you began talking about
now hold on. I don't mean to interrupt. You gotta say your name.
Oh yes, of course.
Say your name. Give us a little background.
I am Dr. Kathryn Benjamin Golden, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Delaware in the Department of Africana Studies. I am really bred within this field of Black Studies, Africana Studies. I did my doctorate at UC Berkeley in the Department of African and African American Studies and African Diaspora Studies. And then prior to that, I was doing a master's at the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia. Yep. And I worked with the late, great Dr. Manning Marable, who is, I owe a great deal to. Okay. He was one of the most prolific, not only activists, but, public scholars, writers. So yeah, he really was one of the first of my mentors to work with me on the topic that I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, but before we get to the topic, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you. I mean, no disrespect in this regard, but I got to talk about you personally just a tad. Some of viewers get to know you a little bit. Where were you born and raised? Great question. Because as you can see in the back, I don't know if you can see, but yeah, the Oakland Bay Bridge is right there. Okay. Because I am born and raised in Northern California. I'm from the Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area. And okay. So it was great to do my work there at Berkeley. Okay. Let me ask you this: how did your parents and grandparents get to Oakland? Oh, that's a story. That's
Yeah.
a real story. Well, they are from the South, which is probably
Sure.
why, which is absolutely why I'm invested in the work I do on Southern Black folks. But yeah, my maternal grandparents are both from Louisiana. Well, they moved from Louisiana out. They moved from New Orleans during World War II. My grandfather on my mother's side was actually the first Black disc jockey in San Francisco, and his name is John Anthony Hardy. But he was actually born and raised in Greenville, Mississippi. They moved because of his position as a disc jockey for one of the radio stations in San Francisco in the late 50s.
Okay.
Yeah, and my grandmother, she was born and raised in New Orleans, but they both passed away in California in the Bay Area. They lived their whole lives there.
Sure.
My paternal grandparents are from Texas and Missouri, so they happened to meet in California.
Okay.
This is the second Great Migration.
Sure.
For them, both of them moved independently to the Bay Area and met there.
Let me ask you this: do you know where the plantation is in your family?
Oh, which one? I'm sure there are countless. There are countless plantations. So it's interesting you asked that. My family just met and was talking about my uncle is doing a lot of research on family history, and they happened to find the White Hardys. Hardys is my mom's maternal name, and they traced these 4 Hardy brothers that were from Isle of Wight County in Virginia, who moved to Western Virginia and then took their enslaved people to Greenville, Mississippi, which is where my grandfather eventually is born years later. But there's a couple of plantations in Virginia that they left behind that are still in the Hardy name, that Hardys still are in and living around.
Really?
Oh yeah, they're there.
Really?
And some of them have moved outside of Southern spaces and have done their own genealogical work. And it's interesting because one of those white Hardys is living in Washington State somewhere, and has published a bunch of or blogged a bunch of our family history has expressly said, this is a gesture for those my family enslaved. So it's work that I appreciate, while it still is difficult and disgusting to see the ways in which we were owned, right?
So let me ask you this, and I mean no disrespect in this, but I mean we get into the heart of. There's some white in the family, in the Hardys.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line.
Lots. Yeah. So my grandfather was half white, actually.
Yeah, there you go. I know, because I mean that's how we evolved to be who we are in that regard. And so this person that blog, would you want to meet them? Who's a part of the enslavers?
I don't know that I need to meet them. I don't have any desire really to that won't give me any kind of peace. What gives me peace is doing the work of storytelling around those that were of African descent who were enslaved initially. That is what is redressed, and that is what is healing, I think, for me. I don't need to meet them. It's not
okay. When you say healing for you, you want to tell the stories of their survival.
Yes. When you talk about resilience, that is the essence of the work I do, and resistance. So
you give us a story. Give us one of those resilient stories that might have happened.
So you were talking about many different kinds of avenues that enslaved people took to free themselves or to assert their freedom, to claim or get move a little bit closer to what it means to be free, right? To live a free life. And one of those ways, in addition to the lawsuits you talked about and just running away, maybe to the north, maybe to the west, I do work on staying put within the belly of the beast through Marronage, so Maroon communities. And these are communities of what we would say are runaway slaves, but it's beyond running away. It is a perpetual state of flight. It is. but it's also recreating life, recreating free life in wilderness spaces. In places.
Okay, let me stop you there. Don't lose that. What does Maroon mean?
Maroon. This is a hemispheric tradition. It is wherever there were slaveholding territories, there were Maroons, and this is a word that derives from the Spanish word cimarron. That word is originally used when the Spanish are, in the very early colonial moment, like early 1500s, to describe runaway cows that and wild cattle, cattle that cannot be domesticated. And so that's the way that this word is first used to describe these feral cows. But then as slavery ramps up and the slave trade continues, it begins to be used to describe African people who are running away and also refuse to be domesticated, refuse to be, contained or comply, and refuse the system altogether. And they took to the mountains, and they took to the woods, and they took to the swamps or the forests, and they set up alternative lives in these spaces. So when I said in the belly of the beast, I meant they're not running to New York City. They're not running to Philadelphia, or they're not running, to live with and among slaveholding society. They are running to seize for themselves their own alternative life. And there are huge Maroon communities. I mean, I'm talking 300 in Jamaica, the Windward Maroons, for example. There was 300 Maroons living in in cockpit country, which is like cliffs and mountains. And they couldn't be recaptured. The British tried very, very hard, and they couldn't be recaptured.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's what the Maroons.
I got you.
Yeah.
And so that happened, as you suspect, in your family, or just some stories that you know?
Now linking back to my family, I have no knowledge that this is something that any ancestor of mine did. I wouldn't doubt it, because it was quite common to run and to defy, through one's motions of running and your feet leaving. But I don't have a specific story about my own family.
Sure.
Lots of other stories, but not in my.
Okay, how about this? When they ran and they did not did not run to a free territory, they still stayed within a slave state. Is that the case?
That is the case.
Is there an identifiable location that was known for them to reside in?
Absolutely. So when I was talking about Jamaica, the Caribbean had the most intense, strong, enduring, large, in terms of the populations of these fugitives or Maroons. But in the United States, there were Maroon communities also. And so that's the work I do. In fact, my work is in the Great Dismal Swamp, and that is a swamp straddling the border between the eastern border along the seaboard between Virginia and North Carolina. It's right there, still there. It encompasses cities like Virginia Beach, Norfolk, in North Carolina, Elizabeth City and Edenton. So it's just that eastern area. And it used to be 2,000 square feet before, in the early 19th century, there was intense draining and canals were dug by enslaved labor. And so it becomes sort of diminished, and now is only 10% of what it used to be, which was, again, 2,000 square feet, which is the size of modern Delaware. I mean, this is the size of a small state of Delaware. But that's pretty big to be right smack in the middle between Virginia and North Carolina. And so you have thousands of people running through, but also staying and creating communities and really wreaking havoc on these neighboring plantation worlds, these cities and towns that are all sort of being built in this swamp and around the swamp. The swamp it's not like there's one body of water and that's it. It's a sprawling, there's many different pockets. Then there's dry areas that are miles long, and then there's wet areas that are miles long. So towns can be built in and through it. But there is certainly a deep swamp, which is the most remote part of it, where you have the most long enduring communities of Maroons in the United States living.
When you say swamp, all I can think of is wetland, trees coming up, and alligators.
Well, yeah, so early there are reports, like I'm talking in the 1600s, there are reports of alligators and beasts like reptiles, but there are no alligators there. I've been in it. There are none. Plus we know now, and there weren't many sightings of this. Now, that certainly is not the case in swamps in Louisiana.
Right.
In the lower states, in Florida, certainly there are many swamps as well, where you also see maroon communities, although they're smaller because the swamps are smaller. Except for Florida. Florida is a huge maroon community known as the Black Seminoles. They're there as well, also fighting in 2 Seminole Wars against Andrew Jackson. And it's tremendous what they were able to accomplish in Florida.
Okay.
But yeah, so I'm up in Virginia.
Okay. Let me say this. I'm gonna go back to that, which is a part of your discussion and so on. So, but I wanna kind of reverse back to your family going in Oakland, California. Just about you just a little longer. Did you know the Black Panthers? Did you see them?
Well,
you might have been younger.
They are active, and yeah, the culture of Oakland is very much so rooted in Black power, and all of the efforts of the Black Panther Party. There is, varied, dotted across the landscape of the Bay Area, various historical markers. There's murals and kind of a culture of that persisting resistance, and also community control over our neighborhoods. And unfortunately, the Bay Area right now is experiencing a lot of gentrification.
Yeah, sure, and,
sure. People are moving in from all over to have closer access to Silicon Valley, and that is bringing a lot of folks from outside. And so the culture is changing and things are shifting.
Sure.
But certainly it is kind of foundational to Oakland in particular.
Sure.
Yeah, in terms of the kind of protests and programs that the Black Panthers had in the 60s and were instrumental in sustaining, and like standing outside of a courthouse armed, right? Those things aren't happening anymore.
Let me ask you this: what do you think? Well, excuse me. What do you think made Oakland special for there to be an attitude of starting a Black Panthers? Was there something that the city administration did that brought on the rise of this effort?
If you are moving, and we know that most Black people have come into the Bay Area and California in general through migratory waves and looking for opportunity and leaving a condition and a situation in the South where there weren't opportunities, and where the racism there was so violent and so oppressive that people were just simply wanting to leave and start anew. Right. And there were jobs in the Bay Area, and there were jobs in California, especially during wartime. And so when you come in with the hopes that things are going to be good for you, and you will be able to create life and have a future which is not steeped in that kind of violence and racism and exclusion, sure. Then when that actually is not the case, and you are heavily policed, and you are given the worst kind of neighborhoods, and access to education for your children is not there, people get upset about that, and
sure,
naturally and rightfully so. But I think that the Oakland Police Department was really instrumental in the urgency, the sense of urgency. We got to organize for ourselves. We have to protect ourselves.
Sure.
We have to create our own food programs and take care of ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
Because we're not getting it here, and our parents moved for us, and so we're gonna have to do it ourselves.
Did you live on there growing up? Did you live inside Oakland in the Black neighborhood? What was the name of the Black neighborhood?
It's West Oakland. West Oakland was where the Panthers headquarters were, and you will see parks named after Huey Newton, all and beyond. And there are several Black Panthers like Elaine Brown, I think, right, who is still very much so active in terms of like Black Lives Matter and modern movements for the unfinished business of freedom. I didn't grow up in Oakland. I was born in Oakland. I grew up in Richmond, which is a neighboring city,
right.
Which also has a very similar history, not in terms of the Black Panther Party, but in terms of Black people being there for World War II jobs.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
So what led you to like Black history like you did? Is there some defining moment that you attribute to how you became who you are in this regard?
Yes, there is. And it is absolutely and unquestionably the efforts of my parents and the love of my parents, both of whom come from those four great souls that I spoke to you about that
Yes.
come from, the Midwest and the South, my grandparents. But I actually grew up singing "Black is Beautiful, Free Huey" because Huey was, incarcerated. And I think this was probably at the end of the 80s. And I was at a white girl playmate's house and I was singing this and they sent me home and said, she can't be singing that. And so then I must have been 4. And so,
okay.
But this is the earliest, that means that it was in my home. And then it also means that this is my, earliest memory of talking about, Black culture, Black history, and race, racial difference, racism. Of course, at such an early age, the conversation was very simple, but it evolved throughout my life and it was very consistent. I grew up celebrating Kwanzaa and having a community of folks who are like-minded, having cousins who talked about these 7 principles, and he talked about black business. That's one of the principles,
Sure.
Ujamaa, cooperative economics. We
That's
have to pool our resources together and support one another and support our businesses because we need our own land and wealth and resources. And so that's, that spoke to me when you shared your work.
Yeah. So when you came to conclude this is my career path, how did you come to say what would be my specialty, which, as you kind of alluded earlier, is more Africana studies and so on and so forth? So
that's a good question because I started, my dad had a huge bookshelf with tons of books that were books like, by Afrocentric thinkers, Molefi Asante, Malana Karanga, and Cheikante Diop, and Ivan Van Sertima, others about histories that have been suppressed, the ways that dominant historiography has excluded African histories before our captivity, before slavery, but also the ways in which we have been boldly resistant through the period of captivity, and this continues. And so those hidden histories, the suppressed histories, the silences really was why I decided to go into this field. I was interested in telling those stories that have been most marginalized and that most people don't know because there's been willful suppression of them.
Sure.
And so that's why I began in this field.
Sure. Well, I don't know if let's say this question here. When I hear the term, and you said it often, Africana studies.
Yes.
Is Africana studies, is that different than just studying Black history? Is there something, and the word Africana, is that still Africa, Africana, or is there something different to what that word is and what it means?
That's such a good question. And I think many of us in this field are not in a total agreement about the specificity of Africana versus African diaspora or versus, especially those two.
Right.
African diaspora versus Africana, there's a lot of overlap. I think Africana assumes a kind of centering of Africa, not the diaspora. So it is a way
Okay, well, let me stop you there. When you say not the diaspora, it's about Africa and not the Caribbean as much?
No, it's not to say that it's not about the diaspora, but it is to say that the conversations and the scholarship that we are having in Africana, there is a kind of assumption that it's going to begin with an African center. And everything else is also no less important, but that we should recognize a kind of origin. Now, African diaspora studies is beginning with the diaspora.
And the diaspora is what?
The dispersal of people that are African and people of African descent across the world. Okay. The dispersal, the global presence and life and experience of African descendants across the world. So it doesn't necessarily begin with Africa. In fact, in African diaspora studies, oftentimes there is an American-centered nature of the scholarship. Right. And Africana studies, I think, is really trying to say, we must recognize we are African, first and foremost. And we will talk about our movements and our migration and our forced migration and all of the aftermath. We will talk about it all. Black studies is all of this too. So there's a lot of slippage, right? Black studies can be all of that, but the word Black is absolutely political. And, you know, this field is political and necessarily so, but it doesn't necessarily mean African. It doesn't necessarily mean that. There's many different interpretations of what Blackness is. Black history is not Black studies. Black studies is not just the past, but our futures and our culture, our art, our dance, you know, Black studies, Africana studies, it's all encompassing. As opposed to African history or African American history.
So when we say Africana studies, and you name some names that I'm not familiar with, just a second ago. What they talk about is, let's find out the origin of civilization in Africa, which is where we all will agree that it all happened.
Right.
And then what else are we saying when we talk about Africana studies? Well,
so the scholars I mentioned are foundational to the field. Some of the, you know, they have given us foundations in Black studies. So that's actually Introduction to Black Studies. That's Maulana Karenga's huge book, which spans history. It is a historical approach, but it's spanning history, ancient history, up until I think it goes into the 20th century. I'm pretty sure, and it is taught as an introduction, right, to this field, oftentimes. But these are some of the early Black studies thinkers. Cheikh Diop's work, of course, is trying to correct a narrative that, well, Egypt is not somehow what Egypt has given the world in terms of civilization and the contributions of Nile Valley civilizations. He's trying to challenge, and he does very, very successfully, the idea that they're not Africans, that Egyptians were not Africans, which is actually what people like, you know, E.A. Wallace Budge. I mean, this is a white British man who was writing in, I guess, the early 1900s, saying essentially that they're not of African descent. I believe that he's one of those people, those early historians, white historians, that are trying to disassociate Egypt from Africans and Africa. And there's, of course, the field of Egyptology has a hard time understanding that the first Egyptians, in fact, are African, right?
How can they not say that when it's in Africa?
Well, see, because, you know, this is the question we should really talk about, right? Okay. And of course, the reason is because there is, again, a very willful disavowal of African people's humanity, African people's capabilities, you know, a unwillingness to see African people's contributions to society, to as foundational human beings in this world.
Really?
Right? Well, yes, of course. I mean, thinking about the field of history, thinking about who were the first historians in terms of traditional history, historical writing. They are white men who are writing from their perspective. They are writing heavily steeped in their own ethnocentric pride. They're also invested in the current, so whatever their current social world was, to preserve the status quo. So if you are writing and publishing and open to thinking about how the people that you want to enslave and oppress and use for your own financial and economic gain and prominence and power, if you're writing that they in fact are the fathers and mothers of civilization, that is risking and threatening the system that you would like.
Oh yeah, okay, I can see that point. Yeah.
So that's,
and so that with that they say they know a lot of the development of our civilization came out of Egypt. And so we can't say that we can connect them to being Black people, because then we are saying that, okay.
African people have history. African people have history and
I got you.
And are full human beings. Well, then we shouldn't be enslaving them, right? I mean, so this is the sort of thinking that
I got you.
It's entirely willful to ignore people's humanity as a rationale for enslaving them, as a rationale for exploiting them.
I got you.
So
when we talk about I guess this is on the line of, I suspect, when we talk Africana studies, what we're talking about is what did Africans bring to, what did they develop in the first days to create civilization in terms of math and science and so on and so forth? Is that a part of that study?
I think it would be great. So one of the first books that I spent time reading before I even began my master's in African American studies was a book written by a man named Tony Browder, and I just would really ask that your viewers check this out. Tony Browder has written a book called Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, and it's so introductory. It's one of the first I've read, but he is talking about how we, and in Western classical civilization and Western philosophy and history, European-centered scholarship has said that the first civilizations are Greek and Roman. Okay, and what Anthony Browder is doing is saying our whole civilization, we are Westernized, and our entire idea of what high civilization is based on Greek architecture. Just look at Washington, D.C., how it's built. And yet all of these things, the Greeks, the Romans are basing their civilization on their learning and borrowing from people of African descent from the Nile Valley. And there's so many examples that he has pinpointed, from religion, again, to, as you said, math and science and astrology. And when I said religion, I mean, even the Greek and Roman gods are based on Egyptian principles that are in the sacred scrolls and hieroglyphics. The Washington Monument is in fact an Egyptian obelisk or tekken, and so it's actually that's what it is. And so there's been a lot of borrowing, and so Anthony Browder is saying when we begin to think about what civilization is, we should understand that these are African contributions to Western ideas of what it means to be in a sophisticated civilization.
Yeah, I love it.
So, yeah.
So when you teach, what are your go-to stories? Let's say first day of class or something like that, and you pick a whatever class it may be.
Yeah.
What is your go-to story that then it says, okay, and this is what we're going to base this on. This is what we're going to learn this semester. Is there like something that somebody says, oh, I did not know that?
Yeah,
or
I mean,
whatever.
I do begin, so I teach early African American history. I teach African American history to the Civil War. I teach American slavery, and I'm about to, and I have taught in the past, a course on Maroon societies in the Atlantic world. And then I teach Black women's history until 1865. So those are the courses that I have under my belt that I'm teaching. And I'll just talk about the American slavery class because I do begin with my own work, and I do, introduce the work I'm doing, and I teach a varied range of students from different backgrounds, and even Black ones don't necessarily know what, as you asked as well, what is a Maroon? What is this? What is this idea? And, part of that question is something I'm trying to remedy, because I feel very strongly, to use that word strong, I feel very strongly that we all need to know that Maroons lived in this country, because it really, why should the United States be any exception to the rest of this Western hemisphere, the rest of the Caribbean and Latin America? Black people in this country as well fought in this particular form of resistance by, again, fleeing, setting up community. And I mean, sustaining, you talked about using healthy eating and using the natural resources around. Maroons are, and I talk about the Dismal Swamp. So to answer your question, I talk about the Great Dismal Swamp. I talk about what I have found there. I was a part of a dig, and there's an archaeological dig that has excavated one Maroon camp in this deep swamp area. And so I do share with students about that work, and how I can't imagine going into the swamp with no gear, running, fleeing in a state of real emergency. I went in with a team of archaeologists, very safely, with fish waders and, protective gear and bug spray, right? And so
sure.
are running, and navigating carefully this could be treacherous swamp. But also, why I said could be is because it's also a nurturing spot to our resistance, to our insurgency, and it nurtures that by providing a plethora of wild game, providing medicines naturally growing in terms of plant life, and food. And the water is perfectly safe to drink. And
oh, really?
Oh, yes. In fact, sailors and even pirates are going into this area just for the express purpose of getting this water for their return voyages in the Caribbean. So this is like, and NASA has tested on this water. It's very special water. It's very dark. It's very full of I guess, and actually I'm not going to say this because I'm not entirely sure, but it's a dark water that is considered to have a lot of healing properties. That's what it's been written about.
Sure.
So I do share that because a lot of students are from this area, and this mid-Atlantic area, and to understand that not far from where we are, in fact, the home state of some of my students being Virginia, it is stunning to students, and a good way to begin this, because I teach with the approach of centering enslaved people's choices, decision-making, and experiences. And so to begin with the decision to live in a swamp said a great deal about what's going on in the plantation world that they would want to avoid, and that they would want to leave and reject.
Is there any idea of any sort of how many people might have been Maroons in some particular location or something like that? Is there documentation of names of Maroon towns or any of that kind of thing?
Well, so there is, one scholar has estimated, and based on documentation alone, there's documents that have been compiled, at least in one study, of over 50 Maroon communities across the South, from Texas to Maryland.
Okay.
Now, unquestionably, there were more than that, because those 50 that were documented means that they failed, means that they were captured, means that the authorities found them.
Oh,
that's why,
really?
That's why there is a document. That's why there's a record of their existence. So Maroons never want to be found. They are not interested in rejoining.
Sure.
Society. And so, without question, there are some that never get found. And so, for those, how do you quantify them? So the question is, absolutely, they're ever present, and the question is to what extent, but
Sure.
certainly they're shaking things up. And the temptation and the interest in not staying in the sites of one's captivity is always there. So we can begin to imagine from that point.
Sure. Is there, would Rosewood, Florida be considered a Maroon community? Because I think it's kind of more of in a swampy, woody area that no people went to.
I don't know about Rosewood, Florida.
Yeah. Okay.
What is that? What is Rosewood?
Rosewood, Florida is an area that is in the swamps, and from what I gather, it was developed. Well, maybe not in swamps, but in a wooded area that people did not want to go. They didn't know what was back there, that kind of thing, and they developed it. I'm gonna look into that. Okay. Let me ask you this: when you went on that archaeological dig, you dug into the ground and you found something?
Oh yes. So now I will say I didn't do very much digging, okay, because I'm not an archaeologist, right, but I was there to be in the space and understand what it meant, the sensorial, how did it feel to be in this place? How can we imagine what it was like to live in a swamp? I was there for those kinds of, to try to get closer to understanding that from Maroon perspectives, from Black people's perspectives. But the digging was happening all around me. And this dig took place in less than 1% of the totality of the swamp. So it's such a small area. But what was found were 11 cabins. There was 2 fire pits. I think it was 2 fire pits, might have been 1. But yeah, there was more than 1 fire pit. And the cabins were structured in a way where the fire pit was central. So you get the sense that people are able to laugh, to sing, to dance, to eat and share a meal together, to not simply just be hiding out in the swamp, but also to be enjoying life. There was a defense mechanism, sort of a palisade, a defense wall that was found, what looks like a defense wall because it's not a squared shape. It's just sort of one post holes along one sort of linear thing. And we know that defense would have been very important. And that's a staple, or that's a characteristic of all kinds of Maroon communities. What else was found? They found gunflint. So Maroons are armed in there. You know, they are on watch. They are battle ready. They dug up a couple of clay pipe fragments, but not much from the outside world. So those are really the things that were found from the outside world. And in doing the dating of the soil, these objects are placed in the ground dating from between 1700 to 1865. So they are there for a long time. So these are multi-generational communities in this area. This is the deep swamp. Again, it'd be very hard to get there. And it was hard. I'll tell you right now, it was very hard to get there. We walked for a mile in the swamp before you got to an island. So, yeah.
I got a couple more. How did they do this? Okay, we're on a plantation. So now it's a bunch of us that are fleeing at the same time, or a few of us flee, but we have got word of where others are and we go find them? How do they develop this? That's
such a good question, because yeah, I mean, that question is getting at the strategy of this. I mean, this is not just ad hoc, let's run up in the swamp. No, this is strategic. It's really intellectual work. It's studying the land, but it's also intellectual because you are studying people, studying who can you trust, who can you tell
among the Black people, among the Black people. Yes.
Who can you trust? Who can harbor in secret subversive information? Also, who potentially can you trade with without your location being exposed? But before the decision to leave, in the enslaved community, in enslaved communities, there's already a pre-existing landscape of Black secret knowledge, or a rival geography, as one scholar has called it, meaning there is already this kind of culture and way that enslaved people are using the land and passing information and meeting out at when they're not supposed to, or going somewhere where they're not supposed to be, that rivals with where the plantation owners, the masters and enslavers want them to be, and rivals with their interests and what they want. That's already happening. So there's already secret knowledge, and there's already that kind of exchange of illicit, illicit exchange. And so with that being first and foremost, that predates and that helps usher in more further insurgent possibilities for resistance. And so people are tapping into that pre-existing rival geography, and again, doing the work of studying where to go, what is the best, what is going to be in the best interest of an individual or a collective. There are a lot of individual Maroons in the Great Dismal Swamp. There's not one community at all. There's many, many, many at the same time. But for this particular community that I just described that was living in the deep swamp, I believe, and others that are doing this work believe, that there was some kind of certain people knew about this community, but that in order to welcome someone into that community, there would have necessarily had to have been an initiation period. There would have had to be, so there's government, there's self-government. There's got to be or else it wouldn't have been able to sustain itself across generations. There had to be a sense of order. There had to be some kind of labor division. Who's gonna do what? And how, who will go out if we ever need to go out and trade. I mean, how are they getting clay pipes in there? Where are they getting tobacco? These are questions. How did they get how did they arm themselves? There is some kind of interaction, although minimal, with the outside world. And so that means to me that also whoever's leaving and coming back is a trusted person to recruit, or a trusted person to, get news and bring it back. But yeah, these are questions. And so we have to really sit with what is probable, likely, possible based on the limited material records we have, but also documented written records that we have.
Is there instances where, and you said over generations, there are instances where somebody, 5, 6 people, they flee at the same time from somebody's plantation, and they all go into the swamp and they sit there, and then they build this community, and then all of a sudden others join them.
Yeah.
And now they're going, and now years have gone past, the elders have died and the others stay because slavery is still going on. Right. That sums it up, maybe.
Yeah. So earliest written records are showing a lot of individual men that are able to move through the swamp. One, because they may have been employed there to start digging these canals, but also because men enjoyed more mobility in general. That they were hired out. They were hired out often outside of farms and outside of plantations to do things like be draymen or work in the rivers, and or have skilled labor positions like blacksmiths, or that may have taken them outside of plantation spaces. And enslaved women generally did not have those kinds of jobs, except for maybe midwives. Yeah. And so a lot of the time there were individual men who are able to go in the swamp and leave. But then at the same time, there are early records of a whole family. There's at least one record from the colonial period of an entire family who was described as this traveler as being of dubious freedom. He doubted that they were really a free family living in this cabin in the swamp. Okay. So if you can think that there were whole families sometimes, that is the basis of a community if more people join. Sure. with trust and faith.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Is there as I almost kind of come to close because you jamming. Oh my God, you took me in another direction and I'm glad to be there. Were there rules, laws, otherwise, documentation, advertisement in newspapers where the enslavers had begun to find out that this is what they were doing and then did something systematically and in an organized way to capture the people, whatever.
You know, and it's a testament to their resiliency and tenacity and just refusal to back down, that many were not captured and that many continued until the Civil War. But there were certainly efforts to scour this swamp. There were lots of efforts because it became, by the end of the 18th century, so the early 1800s, there was a reputation of this swamp. There began to be a reputation, like, oh wow, people, a lot of people are in here. And you know, in the mid 19th century, there's an maybe it's 1830s. There's an abolitionist, a white abolitionist, who's writing the total property lost in that dismal swamp must be over $40,000, and that is maybe it's an even higher amount actually than 40,000.
When you say property, you mean slaves, enslaved.
Yeah. And don't quote me with the 40,000, but it was some astronomical number of you know, wealth that is lost within this swamp. So there's a reputation. There were efforts to get people out, absolutely. In 1847, so after Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831, there's mass efforts to scour this swamp. I mean, it's all in the newspapers. People are like, the rebels at large are all headed to the Dismal Swamp. And Southampton County is, you know, 50 miles away from the Great Dismal Swamp. So they're like, oh yeah, Nat Turner's going to the Dismal Swamp. So there's all these efforts from North Carolina up to go in there and get people out. And a couple, you know, there are a handful of fugitives that are found, who probably had nothing to do with Nat Turner at all, but they're there and they're found. Prior to that, you know, around the Revolutionary War, after the Revolutionary War, but in this Revolutionary era, Gabriel Prosser's rebellion, people also began to associate Gabriel Prosser's insurgent plans, his conspiracy, with meeting places that might have been in this swamp. And in fact, there was truth to that, because people were organizing another rebellion after Gabriel Turner's conspiracy failed. 2 years later, they're using the swamp, literally using the swamp to make plans, strategize, devise another rebellion, hiding guns in the swamp. And so people are aware of these things, and there's records of it. Now they weren't able to, because it's a swamp, which is the beauty of the swamp, because it's such an intense place, they weren't always able to find and locate where enslaved people, where Maroons are meeting, collaborating, and working against the system. So there were efforts, and some of them were successful. And again, most of the documented records I have were of those successful efforts.
Sure.
Yeah.
As I got good. You jamming here. How about this? Is there in present day some celebration, recognition of a swamp territory owned by the Maroons? That, you know, we can go down and there's a festival in what would have been one of their areas, something of that sort.
There really should be, but no, there is not. Not in the context of the Tidewater, Virginia area, the Hampton Roads area, which is where this swamp is. No, and in fact, part of my work previous to the work that I'm doing now, which is strictly a history, I was doing work in public history and, you know, challenging this idea and this tendency to not ever discuss the Maroons in terms of the two organizations that now own the swamp. There was very little there about the history of Maroons. They talked about the Underground Railroad, you know, they talked about the enslaved canal workers, but in terms of the Maroons themselves and the things that they were doing, the resistant activities, which were prolonged and enduring, and constant flight, that was kind of, again, a kind of suppressed narrative. And so I was asking questions, and part of my dissertation was about this public history and and racism, basically white priorities, white Southern priorities and white Southern sensitivities around talking about Black resistance prevented a lot of the kind of celebration of Maroon victories that I think we all deserve to collectively remember and collectively celebrate. But it's very new. Now there has just been a Great Dismal Swamp Heritage Act passed, which is going to begin to do some of this work that I've been pushing for to be made more readily accessible to the public, to regular folks. So it's beginning, but I tried to find descendants of Maroons. I was in Black communities around, and I lived there and was talking to folks and going to Black churches, and I mean, really invested in these communities and just asking questions about, does anyone know about the Maroons? And many didn't, but some did. And there were a couple stories that came my way about some ancestors, at least one. There was one story about an ancestor of a local person in Suffolk who shared that her uncle talked about hiding in a tree in the Dismal Swamp. She was a very old woman, but she talked about a great uncle talking about that, and that story being passed down. There's some.
So would you like to see a historical marker of some sort, or that to be a part of a freedom trail, or any of those kind of things?
A digital map is underway, and we are working to make it. You can go there and visit, and because there are 2 public access points, you can go to the refuge in Suffolk, or you can go to the Dismal Swamp, North Carolina Park in Camden, North Carolina. And we're working to incorporate some of the specific stories of named Maroons, known Maroons, and what they did. So you can click it on your phone and look at it and hear about it, and understand the gravity of the space you're in beyond the Civil War or beyond the canal labor.
I got you. Lastly, have you written a book or something like that?
I have recently published 2 things. One is on the public history of the Dismal Swamp and resistance in the Dismal Swamp. That is in this book here.
Yeah, if you got it, let's plug. We plug it on this channel.
You can check out what I was describing as far as the silences on the landscape, of the living landscape, the current landscape of the Dismal Swamp, and the lack thereof of information about the swamp made to the public. But I also would, push you all to check out my article in the Journal of African American History, which was also published last year, called "Armed in the Great Swamp," and it is all about the use of defensive violence and self-defense by way of Maroons in the Great Dismal.
For people to follow you, do you have a website or something like that people can know more of what you're doing and stay in, hear about your great work?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a website, but beyond the University of Delaware Africana Studies Department website, where I am there.
Yes.
And you can follow me on Twitter. I believe my Twitter is Kathryn Elise HB. Kathryn HB. There you go.
Okay, we're gonna put all that in the description, everybody. And we never thought of it. Never thought of it. That's why I even said, "What is a Maroon?" I ain't gonna lie, everybody. And she explained it so succinctly, so well, with such passion. If you don't like this video, I don't know what you will, but we're going to keep giving it to you here at Strong Inspirations. Come on, hit that subscribe button. Like this video. Hit the notifications bell when the videos come up, and tell somebody that this is the source of information as told by the experts. As told by the experts, everybody. I'm so excited that you come on the channel. I say this, and I mean this with super all, doubly all sincerity, that I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind, because you are taking us in directions that we normally don't go. You enlightening us in ways we normally don't get enlightened, because we don't know of this. And you took heed of singing that song when you was 4 years old, and they telling you can't come around. You said, hey, well, I'm gonna make a career out of singing this song in some form or fashion, making your own words, your own song. And then listening to that music and let it resonate throughout the students of your university and throughout others that see you do and hear you do what you do. Thank you so very much for that. That's a beautiful thing. I know you're one of them smart all A students. You got all A's in grade school. I know how it go. All A's in college. And your doctorate was, your PhD, your dissertation was so good, they just said, we ain't got to read it. Give her a paper, let her go. I love it. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming on the channel.
All right, absolutely. And
let me ask you this. Is there a statement, this just came to mind, a mantra or something that the Maroons might have said that you've written or heard that can close us out? Anything like that? A prayer, anything that?
No, they was praying in that swamp. They was praying, but I wouldn't know what they were saying. I know that they were holding close to the heart, right? The bells of liberty, and clutching on that, and that was what kept them moving and kept them alive and kept them going.
That's the last word, everybody. I got nothing left. Thank you again for coming on. I appreciate you. Bye-bye.